Is Kim, and I'm from Skunks in a Box. First of all, I'd like to explain why exactly we are called Skunks in a Box. It is because when the electric field was originally explained to me, it was explained as a skunk in a box, and then as you get further and further away from the box, you don't smell it as much. So yeah, that is why we are called Skunks in a Box. We don't smell, although some of us do. No, I'm just joking. Really, we're fine. But today our presentation is going to be on multiple sclerosis, or as many people just call it, MS. What it is it's a autoimmune disease which attacks the nervous system and has many different symptoms. And as of right now, there is no cure. The only thing that you can really hope for is an early diagnosis. But right now, this one of the first 6 signs that you have MS are eye problems. There's rapid eye movement and other visual problems that occur early in the onset of the disease, as well as numbness in the extremities. And there's followed by a loss of coordination and loss of muscle strength, as well as involuntary movements. And eventually, from the lesions that start on your spine and your brain, you get a loss of cognition. So now Damaris is actually going to talk about how MS applies to physics.
Thank you, Kim. As Kim said, I'm Damaris, and I just wanted to relate MS to physics and quote something from Tony's famous DSP on intelligence book, God, how basically physics relates to MS. So here's a quote from On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. Basically it says, you can visualize these inputs, the inputs to your brain of course, as electrical wires or bundles of optical fibers. So here we have an optical fiber, which is the same as a neural network. So Hawkins says that you might have seen lamps made with optical fibers where pinpoints of colored light appears at the end of each fiber. The inputs to the brain are very much like this, but the fibers are called axons, and they carry neural signals that are called action potentials or spikes, which are partially chemical and partially electrical. These sense organs supply these signals. They are very different, but once they've turned into brain-bound action potentials, they are all the same, just patterns. So now to explain these patterns and action potential, Miranda is going to explain how an action potential goes from your brain and is transferred to, or it goes from neurons and is transferred to your brain. Miranda?
Hi guys. So I'm basically going to just go through the action potential. First, I'm going to start off by showing you the neuron. We have the cell body or soma, the myelinated sheath along the axon, and the dendrites. And the signal goes from the cell body to the dendrites. Here we have the action potential. The first step of the action potential is we begin at a resting potential of negative 70 millivolts. Then when we reach threshold, which is about negative 50 millivolts, the voltage-gated sodium channels open and the sodium rushes into the cell, making it much more positive. It will reach about positive 30 millivolts, and at this point, the sodium gates will close and the potassium gates will open, letting the positive charge of the potassium rush out, making the inside of the cell more negative again, and actually go into hyperpolarization, which makes it go way below negative 70, which keeps the action potential from going backwards along the axon. Right here we show the saltatory conduction of an axon. We have the myelinated sheath right here, which is basically like the conductance, like the plastic on wires, and it speeds up the action potential because it will all of this will only go on at these points. And so now we're going to talk with Jenny about what goes on in a neuron in someone who has MS. Jenny?
Okay. Pretty much what I'm going to discuss is what happens to neurons for patients who have MS. What MS does is it's an autoimmune disease that causes the body to attack the myelinated sheaths along a neuron's axon. Now this only occurs in the central nervous system, so we don't have to worry about this in the peripheral nervous system. However, once this does occur, neurons along the central nervous system have demyelinated axons in certain parts of their axon. Unfortunately, this greatly increases resistance because what a myelin sheath does is it decreases resistance of the current or signal traveling across the axon. So with our equation, we know that V equals IR from physics. We also know that an action potential is an all or nothing. So regardless of whether or not a patient has MS or not, they're still going to have the same action potential, which means they're still going to have the same voltage. So we know that if voltage stays the same and if resistance greatly increases, then our current or our signal is going to have to greatly decrease, or it could even stop. Now the signal can do one of three things. It can either be blocked, where it is completely stopped along the demyelinating axon. It can slow down, but still gradually get there, just take a lot longer. Or it can jump to another axon. And at this point, what it'll do is it takes the path of least resistance, and that is called leakage. Now, Damaris is going to tell us a little bit more about what this means about symptoms along for MS patients.
Thank you, Jenny. So, as Jenny was explaining, when the signal, thank you, Jenny. Now I just want to explain a little bit of the symptoms that go on because of the problems with the signal blocks, signal leaks, and flow of current through the axons. So with the signal block, often what's seen as a symptom in MS patients is that they're numb. And this is often because there's no signal going through, so they really can't feel anything. Also, a really debilitating symptom is that they lose cognition. They lose the ability to think and reason properly. And this is because in MS patients, you often see lesions because the myelination is now gone. So the cells are lesioned and there's no signal getting through. So then you have your brain starts atrophying and you don't send the signals like you used to. So you don't have those waxing of the pathways. You don't get to think as clearly as you used to. So that's often one of the very bad signs of MS is because you use your ability to think. At least, you don't have your body, but once you lose your mind, it's very difficult. Another thing is also signal leak. With signal leak, often if the signal can't get through the myelin because this is all blocked here, because the myelin's gone, if it can't get through the axon, then it will jump to another neuron and fire. So often you see involuntary muscle spasms in patients with MS. This is one of also the symptoms of MS. And also, one of the last symptoms is loss of coordination. So this is often seen with people that their signals slow. So as Jenny was speaking about how when the resistance increases, your current decreases down in action potential because your voltage still stays the same. Your current slows down. So their reaction time is not as fast as a normal person. So they would go and grab something and it's not quite there, or they're going to go up the stairs and their muscles aren't quite reacting as fast as they hoped they would. So these are often symptoms related to defects in the action potential. And now, next we're going to have Kim discuss treatments that can help, that are currently being used to help or diagnose MS patients. Kim?
Okay, so right now, because there is no cure, and really the biggest thing is early diagnosis. If you can diagnose it early, you can prevent more axons from being demyelinated by putting the patients on either anti-inflammatories or steroids or immunosuppressants. The problem is when you're on an immunosuppressant, it does exactly what the name is. It suppresses your immune system, so then you are more susceptible to diseases and other things that could actually attack you. And so you really don't want to be on immunosuppressants for the rest of your life. But another thing that they try to do is put people on steroids. What the steroids do is when there's an inflammation, that's an immunoresponse, the immune system is called to that area where there's the inflammation. So that's where they start destructing the myelin and you get the demyelinated sheath. So if we could decrease inflammation on the sites of different, of the central nervous system, we could in a sense help to prevent the loss of myelin. But again, these are just keeping the disease from moving on. There is no way to actually determine whether or not someone's going to get MS. We don't know how people get MS. There are some links to exposure to mercury or other toxins, but there hasn't been anything that's definitive about it. So also, there's no really known way to repair myelin once it's been destroyed. So the biggest thing is just keeping MS under control. And many times it does go into remission. But that's all that's here right now for treatments. And I don't know who goes next. Oh, so what Miranda is actually going to talk to us about how one of the ways that maybe we could work on an early diagnosis. So, like I said, it's probably the best bet is to find something that we could earlier diagnose with. So that's some of the stuff we're going to discuss now.
As we started brainstorming on different possible detection systems, we started thinking about the giant squid axon, in which they use electrodes, one on the inside and one on the outside of an axon, to test the resting potential of an axon and to therefore test action potential. So we were thinking that if we could do this in humans, then it would be a possible way to test axons and see if an actual action potential is occurring or if it is slowed. So it is possible and actually easy to do this in humans in something like the sciatic nerve, which is like a bundle of neurons. But the problem is getting just an individual neuron to test that, and that would be key in diagnosis. And so now we're going to go back to Kim, and she's going to talk about it.
Okay, so if we could get just one neuron, and we could, using the equation V equals IR again, if we could treat this like a circuit and insert a little tiny ammeter, which would be extremely tiny, and then we could attach a voltmeter, again, a very small, very sensitive voltmeter, we could actually measure the difference between the current in somebody who does not have MS and the current in somebody who does have MS. So if we could get a definitive number that is the difference between someone who's sick and someone who's not, we could get a better diagnosis for people. But again, this would be highly invasive, and it would also be very difficult to find a voltmeter with that sensitivity as well as an ammeter that small. But if we could do it, it would work, and we could get an earlier diagnosis on people. The other thing to think about is when we know that there's a current traveling along here, if the current, a movement of charge, anytime there's a movement of charge, we know from we know that a magnetic field is generated, basically. So we have this magnetic field that's going around the axon, and if we were able to measure the magnetic field, then we could also measure the drop in current, because according to the equation, magnetic field equals mu naught I over 2 pi r. We know that r stays the same, that the radius of the axon isn't changing. So the only thing that would change in a nerve that is from someone who's sick versus a nerve from someone who's not sick would be the current. So again, we could find the drop in current, and that would let us know that the resistance had increased or that demyelination had occurred. So if we could measure just a single axon, that would be great if we could measure the magnetic field, but what would be even better is if we could measure the entire magnetic field given off by the central nervous system of a healthy person, just a person just standing there in general, measuring their magnetic field. And if we could get that, that would be less invasive, and we could get an earlier diagnosis. But actually, now we're going to talk about, this would be just for diagnosis purposes, and then to, for somebody who already has MS, just to get them started on immunosuppressants and anti-inflammatories. But now Damaris is going to talk about what we could do in theory to maybe repair the nervous system. So.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Great idea with the magnetic field for detecting MS, but however, something with treatment that we can apply would be maybe incorporating stem cells, and also treatment that's currently used in treating patients with wound care. So, thank you, Kim. Kim currently works in a wound care facility, and in this wound care facility, they use the electric field, so we know that V equals EQ. They use the change in electric field of each cell to treat wounds. So we know that each cell sends a particular electric field when it's fine. When it's injured, it sends another electric field, a change of electric field, to attract sort of helper immune cells to repair itself. So if we can detect what the E field is in a certain cell that is damaged because of MS, so in a certain neuron cells it's sending a help signal. So in an MS patient, they're sending the help signal, but the oligodendrite cells which come in to help them are not currently available because they're gone, and we don't know exactly what reason why they're gone. But if we can introduce stem cells and predispose them to be oligodendrite cells, and then inject them into an MS patient which is currently sending signals with a certain E field that is sending the help signals, then these certain oligodendrite cells would be attracted to the E field that these injured neuron cells are sending, and it can repair them. So that's what we were thinking as we were brainstorming, how we can incorporate physics and stem cells into a new treatment for MS. So that's our idea, and the only way we can go about this is by doing more research. So if you want to learn more about this, you can go to the website, mssociety.com, or you can get into research or fund research, be an MD, PhD, or a PhD, and get into it. And with that, yes, there's always walks. Contribute any way you can, because this is the next step into treatment of MS and many other diseases, because I'm sure this kind of theory, if stem cells do actually work, can be applied to many other treatments. So now our group, Skunks in a Box.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and until next time.
Bye.
Thank you.